They thought breaking me would be easy. They thought calling me a thief, a liar, and a disgrace would silence me forever. But they never understood one thing. When you try to destroy a woman who carries not one, but two innocent lives inside her, you awaken a storm that will never be stopped. My name is Donna, and I am 28 years old. I live in Miami, Florida, with my husband, Ronald. I never imagined that my own family, the very people who raised me, would one day become the source of my deepest scars. For years, they disapproved of the choices I made, especially my decision to marry Ronald. To them, he was never good enough, and by marrying him, I had betrayed their expectations. Miami had always been my safe haven. The ocean breeze, the tall palm trees, and the busy streets made me feel alive. Ronald and I built our little world here, away from the poisonous whispers of my family. I should have felt peace in the city, but the shadows of my past never stopped following me. Whenever my parents called, I sensed the weight of disapproval in their tone. Whenever my brother or sister spoke to me, I felt like an outsider in my own bloodline. Yet despite all of that, I held on to hope. Maybe one day they would see the love in Ronald's eyes, the honesty in his character, and the joy I carried as I prepared to welcome our twins into this world. 6 months pregnant, I often sat with my hands on my belly, feeling their tiny kicks, telling myself that they were my future. These babies were my reason to keep moving forward, no matter how much hate tried to pull me down. Ronald worked tirelessly, not only to provide for us, but also to shield me from the cruelty of my family. He would remind me, Donna, family isn't about blood, it's about love. And these babies will know what real love feels like. His words gave me strength, but deep inside, I still longed for reconciliation. I wanted to believe that my family could change. But fate had a different plan. The phone call that came from my parents' house was not an olive branch of peace. It was an invitation into a storm that would change everything. I had no idea that walking into that house would shatter every illusion I held and push me into a battle for my dignity, my safety, and the lives of my unborn children. It's strange how the people who are supposed to nurture you can become the ones who poison your spirit. Growing up, my parents, Sandra and Justin, often reminded me that perfection was the only acceptable standard in our home. My mother believed appearances defined worth, and my father measured love in obedience. My brother Eric was their pride, sharp-tongued, arrogant, and untouchable in their eyes. My sister Andrea followed closely behind, always eager to impress, always ready to echo their harsh judgments. And then there was me, the daughter, who never seemed to fit into their design. When I chose Ronald, their disappointment transformed into resentment. They saw him as a man beneath their expectations, a mechanic who worked with his hands rather than someone polished with titles or wealth. Donna, you're throwing your life away, Sandra had spat the day I told her I was marrying him. Justin's silence was even worse. He didn't shout, he didn't argue. He just turned away as though I had ceased to exist. That wound cut deeper than any words. Ronald was everything my family refused to acknowledge. He was loyal, hardworking, and most of all, kind. He made me laugh when the world felt heavy, and he reminded me daily that love was meant to heal, not to harm. But to my family, that didn't matter. They whispered that I had ruined my chances at a respectable life. Every holiday, every gathering, was filled with sharp remarks wrapped in politeness, as if daggers could be disguised as silverware. The truth was, they had been pushing me out long before I even realized it. Whenever Eric visited, my parents' faces lit up with pride. He could do no wrong in their eyes, even when he bragged about reckless spending or questionable business choices. Andrea was treated like the perfect daughter, showered with approval, praised for every minor success. Meanwhile, if I so much as voiced an opinion, I was accused of being ungrateful. The gap widened after I discovered I was pregnant. Instead of joy, their faces hardened with disdain when I shared the news. Sandra scoffed, saying, "Another responsibility Ronald can't handle." Andrea smirked, muttering that I was just trying to trap my husband with children. And Eric, as always, found a way to twist the knife, joking that I'd be broke in no time raising twins. Not one of them asked if I was healthy, if I was happy, or if I was scared. I tried to hide my pain, but the truth gnawed at me. I had always wanted my children to know their grandparents, to grow up surrounded by family. But how could I let them close to the same people who spent years cutting me down? Ronald noticed the hurt in my silence. He held me close one night, whispering, "Donna, you don't need their approval. You only need your own strength and me." His voice steadied my breaking heart. Still, a part of me hoped they would soften. Maybe the arrival of grandchildren would bridge the distance. But their hostility only grew stronger, their eyes colder. They began to search for reasons to accuse me, to call me irresponsible, to paint me as unworthy. It was during this time that Justin started making vague comments about financial troubles. He'd sigh heavily at the dinner table, pretending to worry about future security. Sandra would nod dramatically, hinting that someone was draining their resources. Though they never said it outright, I began to sense where their accusations were leading. My heart sank with every veiled remark, with every side-eyed glance. They were setting the stage. And I, unknowingly, was the actress about to walk into the cruelest performance of my life. The day it happened, I felt an uneasiness in my chest from the moment I woke up. Ronald had already left for work, kissing my forehead before stepping out, and I sat at the kitchen table with my hand resting on my belly. The twins were kicking gently, like a quiet warning I couldn't fully understand. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Sandra. Her tone was sharp, formal, and colder than usual. "Donna, come over. We need to talk about something important. It concerns the family." Her words made me pause. My mother rarely called unless it was to criticize, and the sudden urgency felt suspicious. But I was still her daughter, and despite everything, I couldn't ignore her. I got into the car, drove through Miami's busy streets, and tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, this was about reconciliation. Maybe they wanted to talk about the babies or even offer support. I was wrong. When I stepped into the living room of my parents' house, the atmosphere was already heavy. Sandra sat upright in her chair, her arms crossed like a queen waiting to pass judgment. Justin leaned back, his expression cold and unreadable. Eric stood against the wall with a smug grin plastered on his face, and Andrea twirled a strand of her hair, her smirk matching her brother's. I suddenly realized this was no casual discussion. It was an ambush. Sandra spoke first. "Donna, we know what you've done." My eyebrows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Justin slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed bank records. "You stole $80,000 from the family LLC account. We have proof." My mouth went dry.
"What?"
"That's impossible. I don't even have access to that account." Eric chuckled darkly. "Oh, don't play innocent. Who else would take it? You've always been desperate. Married to a man with no real money, carrying twins you can't afford. It makes perfect sense." The sting of his words cut deep, but the accusation cut deeper. I looked at the papers again, my hands trembling. These records don't prove anything. They don't even show my name. Why would I take money that isn't mine? Andrea leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Because you've always been selfish, Donna. You think you're better than us, living your happy little life in Miami, pretending you don't need this family. Well, now you've crossed the line." I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes.
"No."
"This is insane. I would never steal from you, or from anyone. Why would you even believe this?" Sandra's voice rose, sharp and unforgiving. "Because we know you. You've always been a disappointment. This is just the proof we needed. You betrayed your family, Donna, and now you'll pay for it." My heart pounded as I looked at each of their faces. Not one showed compassion. Not one hesitated in their condemnation. It was as though they had been waiting for this moment, and now they relished tearing me apart. I pressed a hand against my belly, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. "I'm telling you, I didn't do this. I love my family, despite everything. I wouldn't steal your money." Eric sneered. "Then explain where the money went." I faltered, unable to answer a question designed to trap me. The truth was, I couldn't explain it because I wasn't the one who took it. But in their eyes, my silence was admission. Sandra stood, her face twisted with rage. You are no longer welcome in this house, Donna. A thief cannot call herself part of this family. I backed away slowly, my chest tightening. The walls seemed to close in, and the betrayal pierced deeper than any wound. In that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't about money. This was about destroying me, once and for all. And they were about to go much further than words. The silence that followed my mother's words was suffocating. I could hear the ticking of the old wall clock behind me, each second dragging out like a countdown to something inevitable. My heart raced, my breathing shallow as I stood there, trying to gather the courage to speak. But before I could, Sandra's eyes locked onto me with a fury I had never seen before. You disgust me, she spat, stepping forward. First, you shame us by marrying Ronald. Then, you steal from us? You're nothing but a burden. You don't even deserve those babies you're carrying. Her words stabbed through me, sharper than any blade. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but before I could form a single word, Sandra's hand shot out, not to slap me this time, but to seize the heavy metal decanter from the table. It caught the light for a moment, gleaming like a weapon. My eyes widened. Mom, please. But she didn't hesitate. With a sudden burst of rage, she swung the decanter down hard against the side of my head. The impact was deafening. Pain exploded through my skull, white-hot and blinding. My knees buckled as the room tilted, and I felt warm blood begin to trickle down the side of my face. I gasped, stumbling backward, clutching my belly with one hand and reaching toward the wound with the other. Stop, please. My voice was weak, almost drowned out by the ringing in my ears. Eric laughed cruelly, stepping forward as though he had been waiting for this moment. She's pathetic. Look at her, bleeding and still pretending she's innocent. I tried to steady myself, leaning against the wall, but he lunged. His hand tangled violently in my hair, yanking my head back so hard I cried out. Tears mixed with the blood on my face as he dragged me across the polished wooden floor. My scalp burned with each pull, my body screaming in protest. Eric, stop. I sobbed, but my words only fueled him. He sneered. You want to steal from us? You want to betray us? Then get out of this house forever. Sandra stood watching, her chest heaving, the decanter still in her hand. Andrea's lips curled into a satisfied smirk, and Justin remained cold, silent, his arms crossed as if this was nothing more than a punishment long overdue. Eric hauled me through the hallway, my feet scrambling helplessly against the floor. I reached out desperately, my fingers grazing the wall, leaving streaks of blood along the paint. My babies kicked inside me, as if they too were terrified, and the thought of them kept me from collapsing entirely. When we reached the front door, Eric gave one final yank and then shoved me hard. I tumbled forward, my body crashing onto the hard porch. Pain shot through my hip and shoulder as I landed, the world spinning in a haze of agony. I lay there, gasping, my vision blurred, the Miami sun glaring down like an unkind spotlight on my humiliation. I tried to push myself up, my hands trembling, but my strength was nearly gone. Behind me, I heard Eric's voice, dripping with venom. Don't you dare come back here, Donna. You're nothing to us. Nothing. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a final judgment. For a moment, I thought I might lose consciousness. My body ached, my head throbbed, and fear for my unborn children consumed me. I placed both hands over my stomach, whispering desperately, "Hold on, babies. Please hold on." As I lay there on the concrete, the taste of iron in my mouth, I realized the truth in its cruelest form. They didn't just want me out of their lives. They wanted to destroy me completely. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't alone. My strength was broken, but not gone. And in that moment, with blood dripping from my face and my body trembling, I made myself a promise. This would not be the end of me. The world around me blurred as I struggled to stay conscious. My head throbbed where the decanter had struck, blood dampening my hair and dripping down my cheek. I pressed one hand to my stomach, whispering to the twins inside me, clinging to the hope that they were still safe. My breaths came shallow and shaky, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might not last long enough for help to come. Through the ringing in my ears, I fumbled for my phone. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it, but somehow I managed to press Ronald's number. The call barely rang once before he answered. "Donna? What's wrong?" His voice was sharp with worry. "Ronald," I gasped, tears spilling down my face. "Please come back. They hurt me. I'm bleeding. The babies. I'm on my way. Stay where you are." "I'll be there in minutes," he said, his voice fierce and steady, though I could hear the fear trembling beneath it. Those minutes felt like hours. I fought to stay awake, forcing myself not to slip into the darkness that tugged at me. When Ronald's car pulled up, I nearly collapsed with relief. He jumped out, rushing toward me, his eyes wide with horror at the sight of my bloodied face and trembling body. "Donna." He crouched beside me, holding me gently but firmly. "What did they do to you?" My God. His hands shook as he tried to check the wound on my head without hurting me further. I can't lose the babies," I whispered, clutching his arm. "You won't," he said firmly. "I promise you won't. I'm not moving you in my car. It's too dangerous. We're doing this the right way." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. Within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the air. 2 patrol cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the house. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, whispers spreading like wildfire. Ronald kept his arm wrapped around me, refusing to let go as the officers hurried toward us. "Sir, what happened here?" one of them asked. "My wife was assaulted by her family inside that house," Ronald said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "She's pregnant. They attacked her, hit her in the head with a heavy object, and dragged her out. She's bleeding and needs immediate medical attention." The officer's eyes hardened as he looked at me, then toward the front door. "Ma'am, can you confirm this?" I nodded weakly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, that was my mother and brother. They hurt me. My father and sister stood by and let it happen. That was all they needed." While paramedics rushed to my side, gently easing me onto a stretcher, 2 officers stormed into the house. Moments later, Sandra, Justin, Eric, and Andrea were let out in handcuffs. Eric glared at me, his face twisted with hate, while Sandra shrieked that this was all a lie. But the sight of my blood, the bruises forming on my skin, and Ronald's unwavering testimony left no room for doubt. The officers read them their rights as the neighbors looked on in stunned silence. Justice had begun in that very moment. As the paramedics lifted me into the ambulance, Ronald climbed in beside me, refusing to let go of my hand. His eyes were wet, but his grip was steady. "You're safe now, Donna. I won't leave your side. Not now, not ever." For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of hope. My body was broken, but I wasn't alone. Ronald's strength wrapped around me like a shield, and with the flashing red lights guiding us toward the hospital, I knew this battle was far from over. But at least I had survived the first strike. The ambulance ride felt like both a blur and an eternity. The siren wailed above me, echoing in my skull where the decanter had struck, but my mind was fixed on only one thought: my babies. I clutched Ronald's hand as if it were the only thing tethering me to life. Every bump in the road sent fresh pain through my body, but I refused to let go. "Stay with me, Donna," Ronald whispered, his thumb brushing my knuckles. His voice was steady, but I saw the panic burning in his eyes. "You're going to be fine. The babies are going to be fine. Just hold on." The paramedic checked my vitals quickly, shining a light into my eyes. "She's conscious, but losing blood from the head wound. We'll need imaging and fetal monitoring as soon as we arrive. Stay awake, ma'am. Can you tell me your name?" "Donna," I murmured, fighting through the haze. "Donna, 28. That's good. Keep talking. You're doing great." When we reached the hospital, The doors flew open, and I was wheeled inside under harsh fluorescent lights. Nurses hurried alongside the gurney, asking questions, preparing equipment. I felt like I was caught in a whirlwind, voices overlapping, hands moving quickly around me. Ronald never let go of my hand, even as they pushed me toward the emergency ward. "Sir, you'll have to wait outside while we stabilize her," one nurse said firmly. "No," Ronald snapped, his voice breaking. "I'm not leaving her. She's 6 months pregnant. She needs me." Perhaps it was the desperation in his tone or the blood smeared across my face, but the nurse softened and allowed him to stay by my side. The doctor, a calm woman with sharp eyes, leaned over me. "Donna, I'm Dr. Morales. We're going to stitch your wound and run tests to check for a concussion. But first, we're doing a fetal ultrasound to make sure your babies are safe. Stay calm. Breathe slowly." Those words, the babies, made my throat tighten. My whole world rested on what that monitor would show. I lay still as the technician spread the cool gel across my belly, pressing the probe gently against my skin. The screen flickered to life, and within seconds, 2 small heartbeats filled the room. Lubed up. Lubed up. The sound was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. Tears spilled down my cheeks as Ronald bent closer, his face etched with relief. "They're okay," he whispered, pressing his forehead to mine. "They're really okay." Dr. Morales nodded. "Both heartbeats are strong. No signs of distress or internal trauma. We'll continue to monitor them closely, but for now, your babies are safe." Safe. The word echoed in my mind, dissolving the fear that had been crushing me since the moment Sandra raised that decanter. My children had survived. The next hour passed in fragments. Stitches closed the wound on my head. Painkillers dulled the ache in my body. A nurse wrapped a blanket around me, and Ronald helped me sip water. The police arrived at the hospital, taking down every detail of my statement while Ronald filled in what I couldn't remember. When it was finally over, exhaustion weighed me down, but for the first time that night, I felt a fragile sense of peace. My family had tried to destroy me, but I was still standing. And more importantly, so were the 2 tiny lives inside me. Ronald kissed the top of my head as I lay back on the hospital bed. "They can try to break us," he said softly, "but they'll never win. Not while we have each other." And in that sterile room, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the hum of machines, I believed him. The days that followed my release from the hospital blurred together, but the one constant was the knowledge that this wasn't over. My head still throbbed when I moved too quickly, and the stitches tugged painfully against my skin, but the wounds inside me ran deeper. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing Sandra's face twisted with rage, or feeling Eric's grip tearing at my scalp. Yet even as fear lingered, determination rose stronger within me. For the sake of my babies, I had to see this fight through. The state wasted no time in pressing charges. Because the assault had been violent, public, and backed by clear evidence, the district attorney's office filed the case as State of Florida versus Sandra, Justin, Andrea, and Eric. The charges included aggravated assault on a pregnant woman, assault and battery, conspiracy, and financial fraud. My family's names appeared in bold letters on the official paperwork, and for the first time in my life, they were no longer untouchable. They were defendants. Ronald stayed by my side through every meeting with the prosecutor, Megan Brooks. She was sharp, professional, and unshakably confident. "Donna," she told me during our first session, "you don't need to carry the burden of this case alone. The state will fight for you, but we will need your testimony and Ronald's to build the strongest case possible. The jury has to feel your pain, your fear, and your truth." The thought of facing my family in court made my stomach churn. "I don't know if I can look them in the eye again," I admitted. Megan's gaze softened, though her voice stayed firm. "You can. And you will. Not for them, for yourself, for your children. They tried to break you, Donna, but your strength is what will bring them down." In the weeks leading up to trial, my days were filled with preparations. I returned to the hospital for checkups, making sure the twins were still thriving. Every time I heard their strong heartbeats on the monitor, it gave me courage. They were still safe, still alive inside me, and I would make sure they entered a world where truth prevailed over cruelty. Ronald practiced testimony with me at home, sitting across the table, asking the hard questions Megan said I'd have to answer in court. What did your mother say before she hit you? What exactly did Eric do when he dragged you? At first, the words caught in my throat, the memories too raw. But little by little, I found my voice. Every time I repeated the truth out loud, it lost some of its power to haunt me. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, I stood in front of the courthouse, my hand resting protectively on my rounded belly. The building loomed tall, its stone facade cold and unyielding, but I straightened my shoulders. Ronald squeezed my hand, his warmth grounding me. "No matter what happens in there, you're not alone," he whispered. Inside, the courtroom was stark and formal. The American flag stood behind the judge's bench, and the seal of the state of Florida glinted in the light. When the bailiff called the case, my heart pounded in my chest. And then I saw them, Sandra, Justin, Andrea, and Eric, led in by guards, dressed in prison uniforms. For once, their arrogance was dimmed, replaced by unease. Judge Teresa Clark presided with a firm, commanding presence. Her eyes scanned the defendants, then shifted to me. For a moment, I felt exposed, vulnerable under her gaze, but then she nodded slightly, as if to remind me that this was my chance at justice. The prosecutor presented the charges formally, outlining the assault and the theft of the $80,000. My family's lawyer tried to argue, painting me as emotional, unstable, even manipulative. But when Megan stood, her voice cut through the courtroom like steel. The victim is a pregnant woman who suffered physical assault and public humiliation at the hands of her own family. The evidence is overwhelming, and we will prove not only the attack, but the lies they constructed to cover a financial crime. Hearing her defend me with such conviction sent a surge of strength through my veins. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a fighter, and the state stood with me. As the hearing ended and trial was scheduled, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. I would have to take the stand, face the very people who tried to destroy me, and speak my truth. But as I walked out of that courthouse, Ronald's hand steady on my back, I whispered to myself, "I'm ready." The morning of the trial, I felt as though my heart had been replaced with a drum, pounding relentlessly against my ribs. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman who looked stronger than she felt. My rounded belly pressed against the fabric of my dress, reminding me that I wasn't walking into court alone. My babies were with me. Their lives and mine were tied to the truth that had to come out. Ronald held my hand all the way to the courthouse. "Donna," he whispered, his thumb brushing the back of my hand, "you've already survived their worst. Today, you show them they can't take your voice." His words echoed in my chest as we stepped through the courthouse doors, the sound of our footsteps swallowed by the polished marble floors. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Reporters sat in the back rows, neighbors filled the benches, and strangers who had heard about the case watched with anticipation. At the defense table sat Sandra, Justin, Andrea, and Eric, all dressed in muted suits, trying to appear respectable. But their eyes betrayed them. Sandra glared at me with venom. Eric smirked like he still had control. Andrea looked restless, and Justin kept his gaze down, hiding behind silence. When Judge Teresa Clark entered, the room rose, and then silence fell heavy. "This court will now hear the case of the state of Florida versus Sandra, Justin, Andrea, and Eric," she declared. The prosecutor, Megan Brooks, rose first, her presence commanding yet calm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is about betrayal. Not by strangers, not by enemies, but by family, the very people who should have been this woman's greatest source of safety. Instead, they attacked her, lied about her, and nearly destroyed her while she carried 2 innocent lives." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but also lit a fire in my heart. The defense tried to counter, painting me as unstable, claiming I had fabricated the attack to cover my own theft. "She's emotional, irrational, and desperate," their lawyer argued. "She took the money to support her failing life with Ronald." I bit my lips so hard it almost bled, but I held steady. The truth was on my side. When it was my turn to testify, my legs trembled as I walked to the stand. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and then sat, my palms damp against the wooden railing. The eyes of the jury bore into me. For a moment, fear clawed at my throat. But then I felt Ronald's gaze from the front row, strong and steady, anchoring me. "Mrs. Donna," Megan said gently, "can you tell the jury what happened the night of June 14th? I took a deep breath. I was called to my parents' house. They accused me of stealing $80,000 from the family LLC account. I told them I didn't do it, but they didn't care about my answers. They wanted to condemn me. My mother picked up a metal decanter and struck me on the side of the head. I touched the faint scar hidden beneath my hairline. I fell, bleeding. Then my brother Eric grabbed me by the hair and dragged me across the floor before throwing me outside the house." Gasps rippled through the room. My voice shook, but I pressed on. I begged them to stop. I begged them to think of my babies. But they didn't listen. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away, determined. They didn't just attack me, they tried to destroy me. If Ronald hadn't called the police, I don't know if I'd be here today. Megan nodded. "And how far along were you in your pregnancy at the time?" 6 months, I said softly, my hand instinctively resting on my belly. The doctors told me afterward that my babies were safe. But for those hours, I thought I might lose them. The defense tried to rattle me on cross-examination. "Isn't it true you had financial problems? Isn't it possible you took the money and staged this attack for sympathy?" I met the lawyer's gaze firmly. "No, I didn't steal a dime. And nothing justifies the bruises on my body or the stitches in my head." When the doctor testified, she described my injuries and confirmed the ultrasound results showing the twins unharmed. The paramedics recounted finding me bleeding on the porch. The officers detailed how they arrested my family on the spot. Piece by piece, the truth was laid bare. The turning point came when the forensic accountant took the stand. He explained how the bank records showed the withdrawals were linked to Eric's login credentials and traced to his personal expenses. "It is my professional conclusion," he said firmly, "that Eric Whitman was solely responsible for taking the $80,000. The others were complicit in covering it up." Eric's smirk finally faltered. Andrea's face paled, Sandra's lips tightened, and Justin rubbed his temples as though the weight of truth crushed him. By the time Megan gave her closing argument, the jury was leaning forward, hanging on every word. "You have seen the evidence. You have heard the testimony. Donna is not a thief. She is a survivor of cruelty most of us can't imagine, betrayed by her own blood while carrying 2 children. If family cannot be trusted to protect their own, then the law must step in. Justice demands nothing less." When I stepped down from the stand, my knees felt weak, but Ronald caught me, holding me close as I returned to my seat. "You were incredible," he whispered. And for the first time, I believed it. I had spoken my truth. The trial had stripped away the lies, and now, only the verdict remained. The air inside the courtroom felt heavy as the jury filed back into their seats. Every shuffle of feet and rustle of paper echoed in my ears. My palms were damp against my lap as I held Ronald's hand in a tight grip, searching for strength in his steady presence. Judge Teresa Clark's expression was calm but firm, her gavel resting on the bench as though waiting to seal our fate. When the foreperson of the jury stood, I held my breath. "On the charge of aggravated assault on a pregnant woman," he said clearly, "we find the defendant, Sandra Whitman, guilty." Sandra gasped, her face draining of color. My heart leapt. Finally, the truth was being recognized. The verdicts continued, each one striking like thunder. "On the charge of conspiracy and financial fraud, we find the defendant, Justin Whitman, guilty. On the charge of false accusation and conspiracy, we find the defendant, Andrea Whitman, guilty. On the charge of aggravated battery, theft, and conspiracy, we find the defendant, Eric Whitman, guilty." My chest tightened with relief as tears blurred my eyes. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, but Judge Clark silenced them with a firm rap of her gavel. "Order in the court." Sentencing will proceed immediately." She adjusted her glasses, her voice resonant and commanding. "This case is not merely about money or bruises. It is about betrayal by those who had a sacred duty to love and protect. Instead, they chose cruelty, violence, and lies. The law cannot undo what has been done, but it can ensure accountability." Her gaze fell first on Eric, who sat slouched in his chair, glaring at me as if his hate could burn through walls. "Eric Whitman, you not only stole from your family, but you physically assaulted your sister, dragging her while she was 6 months pregnant and leaving her injured. Your actions show a disregard for both human decency and innocent life. You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state prison." Eric's smirk was gone, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. He cursed under his breath as officers stood closer behind him. Next, Judge Clark turned to Andrea. "Andrea Whitman, though you did not strike your sister, you took part in the conspiracy, reinforcing lies and cruelty. For your role, this court sentences you to 7 years in state prison." Andrea's mouth fell open, tears spilling as she shook her head, whispering, No, I didn't think." But the gavel silenced her. Sandra was next. My mother, the woman who had struck me with a decanter, whose face still haunted my nightmares. Judge Clark's voice was sharp. "Sandra Whitman, you assaulted your pregnant daughter with a dangerous object. Your actions placed not only her life, but the lives of 2 unborn children in jeopardy. The law views this as one of the most serious forms of assault. You are hereby sentenced to 6 years in state prison." Sandra collapsed against her lawyer, sobbing, but I felt no sympathy. My scar still throbbed under my hairline, and I could still feel the sting of her words declaring I didn't deserve my children. Finally, Judge Clark faced Justin. He hadn't touched me physically, but his silence and complicity had been as sharp as any weapon. "Justin Whitman, as a father, your duty was to shield your daughter from harm. Instead, you participated in a conspiracy that nearly destroyed her. For your role, you are sentenced to 4 years in state prison." The room was silent except for the sound of Sandra's muffled crying and Andrea's desperate protests. The officer stepped forward, fastening handcuffs tighter, preparing to escort them away. Judge Clark's final words pierced the silence. "Furthermore, a protection order is hereby issued on behalf of Donna Whitman. None of the defendants may contact, approach, or attempt to communicate with her or her family for the duration of their sentences and beyond, as determined by the court." My breath caught as the weight of her words sank in. They could no longer touch me. No phone calls. No letters. No looming shadow of control. The chain they had tried to wrap around my life had been broken. Ronald leaned close, his voice trembling with pride. "It's over, Donna. You're free." And for the first time in years, I truly felt it, free of their grip, their judgment, their cruelty. Justice had spoken, and it had spoken for me. 2 months after the sentencing, the sharp edges of fear finally began to dull. The nightmares still visited me sometimes, the sound of the decanter crashing, Eric's hand ripping at my hair. But when I woke, Ronald was always there, holding me, reminding me I was safe. More than anything, the steady rhythm of my baby's movements inside me kept me anchored. Each kick was a promise. Life was waiting, and it was stronger than the pain of the past. The day labor began. Miami's sun poured through our bedroom window, warm and golden. I clutched Ronald's hand and whispered, "It's time." Panic and joy danced across his face as he rushed to grab the hospital bag. Hours later, surrounded by the steady hum of machines and the calm encouragement of nurses, I gave birth to 2 beautiful baby boys. The sound of their cries filled the room, and tears streamed down my face. Ronald kissed my forehead, his own eyes wet. "They're perfect, Donna. Just like you." Holding them in my arms for the first time was like holding the future itself. Tiny fingers curled around mine, soft breaths warmed my skin, and I felt an overwhelming surge of love unlike anything I had ever known. These boys were not just my children, they were my victory. They were living proof that my family's cruelty had not broken me. The weeks that followed were exhausting, sleepless, and wonderful. Our apartment filled with the scent of baby powder and the gentle cries of newborns. Ronald proved himself to be the kind of father I always knew he would be, patient, tender, and endlessly devoted. Watching him cradle both boys against his chest, whispering promises of love and protection, healed something deep inside me. To celebrate their arrival, Ronald and I organized a small gathering with close friends. There was no grandeur, no show of wealth, just warmth. Balloons floated near the ceiling, laughter filled the room, and the boys slept peacefully in their bassinets, unaware of the love surrounding them. For the first time, I felt what family was truly meant to be, a circle of trust, kindness, and care. At one point during the evening, I stepped aside, standing by the window. The city lights of Miami glittered against the night sky, a reminder of how far I had come. My reflection stared back at me, not as the broken woman who once bled on her parents' porch, but as someone who had survived, who had risen above betrayal, and who had carved out a new beginning. Ronald joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. I smiled, leaning into him. That I finally know what freedom feels like. That I don't have to prove myself to anyone anymore. I have you. I have them. That's all I'll ever need. He kissed the side of my head. They'll grow up knowing their mother is the strongest woman I've ever met. I looked back at our sons, their tiny chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of Sandra's judgment, Eric's cruelty, Andrea's mockery, or Justin's silence. Those voices no longer defined me. My life was no longer chained to their cruelty. It belonged to me, to Ronald, and to the two little boys who had given me the strength to endure it all. And as I watched them sleep, I knew with absolute certainty, this was the beginning of a life built not on pain, but on love. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every week. Your support helps us bring more inspiring content to life. Stay tuned for the next story.